report. Board of Directors work session this Thursday, April 12th, 2018. An announcement, Rashir Borov will be absent tonight. He's ill. A housekeeping item for visitors and board members who may need to use the restrooms. We have HVAC construction going on at this time. If you'll go out that door and follow the signs, you can go up to the second floor to the restrooms that are there. Does any board member know of a conflict of interest, a potential conflict of interest with respect to any item on the agenda tonight? I see none. On April the 4th, the board had a training session on diversity and inclusion training session with Visions. And we discussed increasing the board's role in orientation for new board members, how to build board relationships. We discussed how to take action to maintain increased board diversity and inclusion. And we also discuss formal and informal parliamentary procedures to create inclusion. So we're going to have another follow-up session to complete our training with Vision, and we'll talk later tonight on that. Any questions or other comments the board would like to make on that? Okay. Okay. I'd like to call on Yinka now to make an announcement.
So yesterday I attended the Intergovernmental Parks Work Group, and a couple of things came up. So with regards to OWASA, the Mountains to Sea Trail, so I do have a map. I have one, I can pass it around. I'd like it back. So there are areas of focus. They have planning within it's a 7 Mile Creek and Rocky Run with landowners. So that's their first area of focus. The second area of focus would include OWASA and the landowners in the area down there. So that might be coming up or back to us in the next couple of months once they have everything ready. They have other options, but that's not their primary focus right now, of having a parallel path with roads, railroads, and C86. Some of the trail patterns they're saying is various trails, some more of the natural surface trail instead of the paved greenway system. They're going to have a community meeting after their planning is completed. And then there are also the connections from Alamance to Orange County, and then Orange County to Durham counties is not completed yet. The other thing that attends to OWASA would be UNC. They're renovating their boating at University Lake, and they said that that's going to be a 2-year project. Also, this might be over near like Finley Park. Expected work to be completed in September. Some things that they're doing over there with the athletic fields. So that's the rest. So that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you. Now call on Jeff Danner, discuss the Finance Committee meeting.
I will be out of town on the 18th, and so I have deferred the leadership of that meeting to Heather Payne's on the committee. I know it's on the 18th, but since I was out of town, Heather, I can't recall exactly what time the meeting is. Can you help me?
5:30.
Thank you.
Yes.
Here in this room.
Now call on Heather Payne.
So on Monday, May 7th at 8:30 a.m., Chapel Hill Town Council's OWASA Committee and the Chapel Hill appointees to the OWASA Board of Directors will meet to discuss items of mutual interest, and will be upstairs in the boardroom.
John Young, would you make an announcement?
The Natural Resources and Technical Services Committee will meet Tuesday, May 8th at 4:30 in the OWASA boardroom upstairs from here. And our topic will be source water protection. Also, there's a meeting of the Chatham Orange Task Force, the two counties coming together to discuss items of mutual interest. That's going to be May 10th, 2018 at noon. It's in Pittsburgh at 764 West Street, Building 42 in the conference room 2 on the first floor. And topics are, sorry, I just had it up and then I moved to look at the finance meeting. Topics were kind of discussed at the last meeting. I don't know that they've been finalized, and when we get an agenda, Ed or I will send that around to you. But they intended to talk about Chatham Park from a planning perspective, and the Pittsburgh staff would present that, and then also Obie Creek, the Chapel Hill staff would present that, also 15501 corridor study, and the bus transit connectivity between Chatham and Orange County. Some of those topics relate to us, some of them don't. I will keep you up to date. Thank you.
Barbara Fishy.
The Human Resources Committee will meet on Wednesday, May 9th, 2018 at 5:30 in the OWASA boardroom to continue our discussion of retiree health benefits for new hires as well as 457 deferred compensation.
Does any other board member have an announcement? I will just like to bring to your attention that I will not be able to chair the meeting on April 24th. Heather's going to be able to do it. Okay. Heather, thank you, Heather, has had changed her flight plan to accommodate it. Inca agreed to pitch it if that didn't work out, but okay, so Heather will be here. All right, thank you. All right, staff, Todd Taylor, General Manager of Operations, Agua Vista update to Chapel Hill Town Council.
Yes, last night we wrapped up our Agua Vista Road Show with a full presentation at the Chapel Hill Town Council meeting. We primarily just showed our informational video about the project and answered questions that the council had. Overall, they seemed very enthusiastic about the project, as Board Alderman did. So it was a good exercise to get out in front of those folks and update them on the project.
Thank you, Doug. Stephen Withers, Director of Finance and Customer Service, update on the 2018 refunding bonds.
You should have received an email from us earlier this week, but Series 2018 bonds that are refunding the variable rate bonds that we've talked about over the last couple of months, they were priced on Tuesday, and it was a competitive bid, which I personally hadn't been through before. So it was not only an interesting process, but it turned out very good, very well for us. The way it was priced was better than what the the financial projections that we were presented to you. It came out to where if either of those prospective forecasts for interest rates turn out, it's about $125,000 more that we'll save than what we had. It was awarded to Citigroup, so we avoided getting another product with Wells Fargo. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's essentially it.
Thanks. Now calling Ruth Rouse, Planning and Development Manager, to provide an update on the prescribed burn of 26 acres at King Creek.
All right, so yeah, the prescribed burn went down on Tuesday. I sent you all an email update. Rather than duplicate what was in that email, just wanted to really share with you that I was very impressed with the North Carolina Forest Service, just in how they planned the burn and conducted the burn. It was very obvious to me that safety was their #1 priority, just as it is here at OWASA, and they were also, just in how they planned that and conducted it, were very interested in minimizing the impacts to the neighbors by doing pre-burn, kind of go and drive by and looking at what are the immediate folks around us. They noticed horses, so they purposely chose weather conditions where the prevailing winds were out of the northeast to keep the smoke away from horses, which are sensitive to smoke, as well as it kept it on our land longer and minimized impacts to others. So very impressed with how they conducted themselves and would definitely recommend we use them again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Okay, this is our new addition to the agenda. Any comments, suggestions, or information items from board members? John?
I handed around a news article that's very relevant to our budget and rate setting. And there's some good news here. There are a lot of utilities that are in worse shape than we are. According to the data used in this article, utilities in the U.S. have averaged 5.5% a year increase in rates. And this is mainly driven by utilities that have been behind on replacing worn out or out of date capital equipment, so they're catching up. Another big driver is investments to meet higher water quality standards with wastewater. So anyway, it's kind of interesting to see where we stand relative to other communities. And so one person wrote back a letter saying, water is really important, you know, if it costs a little bit more, it's worth it. And so this person is Professor Neil Grigg out at Colorado State University, who used to be here in North Carolina, head of the Water Resources Research Institute, and also our assistant secretary in our State Department. So it's good to hear from him speaking up for good water and paying what it takes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, John. Okay, and we now move to the consent agenda. Does any board member like to pull an item from the consent agenda? Do we have any comments from the public on the consent agenda? Can I have a motion to adopt?
Move to adopt the consent agenda.
Second.
Second.
Okay, a motion made by Heather, second by Yinka. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. All right, the ayes have it. All right, the board now will move to the regular agenda for discussion. We'll review the employee health, dental, life, dependent life, accidental death, and dismemberment, and long-term disability insurance renewal. I will ask Stephanie Glasgow, the Director of Human Resources and Safety, to kick us off in this discussion.
Thank you very much. So our current contracts will expire on June 30th of 2018. Yesterday, the board was sent an email with a presentation that you will receive tonight from Ellen Tucker with Hill, Chesson, and Woody. Ellen will be providing you information on benchmark data, our current loss ratio, the work that she has done negotiating the renewal we've received from Blue Cross and Blue Shield and analyzing that, as well as some recommendations for some next steps. And we'll be right over here, ready to answer any questions that you have. I'll turn it over to Ellen.
Welcome, Ellen.
Hi. At least I come bearing good news, right, this year?
That's right.
There's
We
one year.
won't stone you tonight.
There was one year when I didn't. We got to a good place, but we didn't start there. Okay, so let's get started. You've seen most of this, but there are a couple trick things that have changed in here just to see if you're awake. But we are going to talk about the benchmarking really quickly, and then we'll go into the actual renewals and negotiations. So this is our benchmarking slide. This is other local governments in the area that have agreed to share their information. So you'll see that we have a $15 copay for primary care, 30 for specialists. That is the best you're going to find in the area. We do have a $750 deductible on the plan, and then everything is covered at 100% after that for those services. And our out-of-pocket max is $1,750 per person, limited to 2 per family. So that's kind of an idea of how we stack up in the local area. Any questions about that?
Go ahead, Ness.
I'm curious, this is nice data, thank you. And if we're first in these categories, I'm wondering about how many of our benchmarks are also kind of have that profile of being first in several categories. So for example, if I asked of the other two with 100% co-insurance, what does their out-of-pocket max are? Are they also in that most generous?
No, they're kind of all over the place. So if you looked at Town Chapel Hill, for example, they're 2040 on their copays. They have no deductible, so it's zero. 100% co-insurance, but their out-of-pocket max, we set it at 3,000, just so that the copays wouldn't hit it, because they don't really have anything else going toward it. So that's kind of artificial. Nobody's really having to pay that much, but.
Right.
So if you picked any of them out, I think you would see that it mixes a little bit, depending on who it is.
Right, so maybe another example, the co-insurance and the deductible, of those three that have the 100% co-insurance, what do their deductibles look like?
So we have one with no deductible. I would have to look. And then ours is $750, and the other one's probably either $750 or $500, but I'd have to pull it and look at it.
Okay, so I'm taking away from that, that the fact that we're sort of in the most generous of the 3 out of 4 categories doesn't make us like really unique. It makes us one of the most generous, but not like
Correct.
the
Yes.
only one that's sort of generous in multiple categories.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you.
So we started out at a 2.5% increase that Blue Cross requested. Normally that would sound very good, but we really thought we deserved a decrease this year, and so we negotiated down to -6. In a perfect world, I would have liked to have gotten to about -10. That's really hard to do, and we'll show you in a minute kind of why. But I've also shown you the total premium and then the portion that OWASA pays of that premium, so you can get a sense of what we're talking about. So at the -6, it'd be 1.9 million that we would pay for the benefits. The rest of it would be paid by the employees. So we're at, 190,549 of negotiated savings versus what they originally requested. This is our plan design. Again, we've not made any changes, so this looks the same as it does this year. The next slide, though, is new. So you'll see on the next slide that we have the option to take the -6 to -7.4. That would be if we move our life and disability to certain carriers that are preferred by Blue Cross. And so they will give you, they call it package pricing discount if you make that change. We can make that change. Making that change actually saves us money on the life and disability cost and also saves us money on the medical cost. Those rates have just come in yesterday and today. They've been exhibited enough for me to get it in here, but I need to read all of the contract language and make sure that everything is the same. Like, we don't want to give up some benefits. So I'm in the process of doing that. But if we did make that change, then we would be at -7.4 on medical instead of -6. Okay? Yes. It's 10.8, I think. I'll show it to you in a minute. I've got it at the end. So what happened? Why did we think we deserved a decrease in medical this year? So this is showing you how much of the premium was actually paid out in claims over the last 4 underwriting periods. And these, remember, those weird rolling 12-month periods of time that Blue Cross uses to determine the renewal. So the first year it was 92.4, meaning 92.4 cents of every dollar went out to pay claims. That did not make Blue Cross happy. Next year it popped up to 93.1. So in other words, they're paying everything back out in claims. They have no money left over for their admin costs and profit and anything else. Then we dropped down to 82.7. They want to be at 82. So we were just above last year where they wanted to be. If you remember, we ended up at a 6.3% increase. Well, now we've just dropped this year. So they only spent 56.7 cents of every dollar on our claims. So now we're one of their favorite customers this year. Clearly, we don't want to stay in that position, right? Because we don't really want to contribute to their profit at that level. At the same time, as I'm telling them we deserve this huge decrease, they're like, look at the past few years, and they're not willing to say yet that what happened this year is going to continue. It could have just been a good year. It could pop up again. So the negotiations were a lot around that. What really is going to happen in the future? Will it stay favorable, or will it go back up to the level it was over the last few years? And so this is what we spent a lot of time talking about, were the large claimants. So I'm tracking this all the way back to December of 2012. We had 2 the first year. We track people when they hit half the pooling level, so this is everybody at 40,000 or more. We had 2 for 110,000, then we had 6 at 560, Then we had 9 the next 2 years. So $1,070,000 and $1,083,000. And then we dropped to 200,000. So really, we just haven't had any large claimants this year. Now, is it reasonable to think that we will continue to not have any? Probably not. I wouldn't tell Blue Cross that, but, so they're being a bit conservative in saying that we don't really think you've necessarily reverted back to the way you were 4 years ago. If we have another good year, however, it'll be a very different discussion. They did change our pulling level. I've got an asterisk on there to 100,000. So for this year and forward, we'll be tracking at 50,000 instead of 40. And they do that every so many years. They reset that pulling level and what they consider to be a large claimant. So that's what our negotiations were around. So we had better large claimants, obviously wanted to get credit for that. There was one person they actually loaded for, and it wasn't one of the 3. It was someone else who had a condition that could turn into a very large cost. However, there were a couple reasons that we thought that wasn't appropriate, and I pulled 4 years of claims on that person, went back, negotiated, and got all of that removed. But that was a lot of what was making up the increase. So we're at a point where we don't need to make any changes to meet budget, obviously. It's just, are we satisfied with the plan the way it is and with the renewal the way we've negotiated it? Any questions, comments?
Any questions from the public on the presentation? Board member, any questions, comments? John?
It's kind of related to my earlier questions. In terms of the benchmark organizations, do we know what % of premiums that these other organizations pay? I guess at the end of the day, that's sort of the net way to calibrate whether we're competitive or generous or not generous.
Yeah, we do have that information. I don't have it with me this second, but we have that data. We know what % of each tier they're paying for. That's what you're asking for the premium.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Would you be willing to share that?
Yeah, I can get it.
Okay, thank you.
You may have it.
But you don't have any.
It's in my car out in the parking lot.
You don't have a belief that we're probably generous like the other data show, but not.
You are,
an
but
outlier.
we
Well,
typically
not an
see
outlier.
that in this type of company. Now, if we just benchmark you against all of the companies in the area, maybe not. They're typically paying 85% of the single rate, but then we get into this industry, you see more employers paying all of the single rate. A difference in how they view benefits and how they offer benefits versus salary when you're looking at total compensation. But I can get that information for you.
Any other questions? Barbara?
It's actually, and it may be for Stephanie, about Rushir's question about employees being able to opt out from health and dental insurance option. Now, when they opt out, do they have to show that they have coverage somewhere else or not? I guess whoever can answer it.
If you were going to pay them to opt out, then yes, you would need to have proof that they have other group coverage.
Okay.
Because otherwise you wouldn't want to pay them to not take our coverage, and you wouldn't want them to go to the marketplace and buy it instead. So they would have
Right.
to show proof that they were on a spouse's plan or something.
Okay.
In that situation, yes.
All right. Thank you.
Didn't we talk about that last year, though, and it was going to cost us more to do that? I don't recall.
It depends on who drops off. We don't really know at this point
Oh,
how many people would take you up on that and which people. So if the healthier ones leave and the sicker ones stay, then it can have an impact. And we won't necessarily know that ahead of time.
I think that's all the questions that we had. You respond to John's question.
Okay, yep,
Now, give that to us and staff can send it out.
I will do that.
Heather, do you have a question?
I'm assuming that when you finish reading all of the contractual language on the AD&D, that will just come back to us as proposed option.
Correct, yes. There's a lot of fine print in those contracts, so we don't want to accidentally make our benefit less rich than it is without knowing it, especially. Okay, so dental and life and disability, we were asked for a 14% increase on dental. We negotiated that down to 6.9%. What would that feel like to the employees? If you're taking family coverage as an employee on dental, that's less than $3 a month, because dental's cheap. So, I mean, it's a bigger increase, but it's not really much money. So that's where we are right now on the dental. And for the life and the long-term disability combined, it was a 15.7% increase. We did send that to market. We looked at 5 carriers, I believe. The one right now, pending contract review, that looks the best is the Hartford, and that would be negative 10.8%, and that would be locked in probably for 3 years by the time I'm done. We want 3-year rates from them if we can get them, and that way it's locked in, they won't go up in that period of time, and that would give us the additional discount off of the medical as well. Yes.
Kevin?
Do you have any idea what's driving that spread? Because that seems really big. 16 to minus 11. I mean, that's basis point spread. I mean, that's huge.
It is, but if we look at some of the others, I mean, I have a negative 17.3, I have a negative 23.8, but those two don't give us the medical discount, and the medical discount's worth more money. So even though those are better standalone,
Right.
life and disability options, we really want the medical savings. That's what really makes the difference. So others were all lower. We didn't have anybody that wasn't lower. And a lot of these are coming off of manual rates based on your demographics and things. There's not really a negotiation around it. You just kind of market it and see what you get. So. But if we could lock that in for 3 years, that's a good deal. And you can only do that when you're moving it. If you're just at your regular renewal, they're not going to lock you in for 3 years.
Any other questions?
So with the lock-in rate for that, would that also keep lowering the medical as well? Does that get locked in?
Yeah, we should get the same discount each year, but it'll be off of whatever the medical is. They won't give us 3-year medical rates, that would be nice. Especially with our decrease, we would take that in a minute. All right.
Anything else?
Anything else?
I think we're good. Oh,
Just a
Ted?
quick question. So this is scheduled for board action on May 10th. Based on what you heard tonight, unless there's some changes or surprises, we would propose to put that on the consent agenda if you agree.
Any comment on that?
Would that also include for the consent agenda, would it include the proposed changes with the new ones that we're currently still waiting on?
Yes, it would include all of what Ellen covered tonight, the health, the dental, and then the ancillary agreements as well.
John?
Well, I think the discussions are going well. I think, to me, the question for the board is whether there's appetite or interest or, in the context of our budget discussions, considering different configurations of our health insurance plans at this time, or is that a longer-term issue? To me, that's the only question. My vote is it's kind of something out in the future. I don't think we can probably wrestle with it so quickly, but.
Yes, and I have trouble with it just because we're also having the potential for a significant decrease. I think it's a decision that you want to study. Yeah, I think the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Our next item is a review of the fiscal year 2019 budget and rate adjustment information. Stephen Winters, Director of Finance and Customer Service, will provide us with that information.
Thanks, sir. So in the 2 March meetings, we talked about the budget, all 3 components of it, capital equipment, CIP, and the operating budget. And you guys had some questions, and we responded to those. At the last meeting, we gave you a preview of like an initial pass at rate adjustments with the intention of coming back at this meeting with options for you to look at. And those rate adjustments that we had projected in the years 4 and 5 were different than what we had talked about last year. So you're rightfully so asked, what changed? And so that's going to be what our main focus of what we talk about tonight. And I say we because Vishnu's going to talk about the changes to the CIP. So anyway, just to give you a heads up is what it is. But there were just a few changes to the operating expense budget. It's in the packet, but as you just heard, our health insurance is less than what we had in the budget. The first draft that you saw, it anticipated a 10% increase. Now we've changed that to where it did not have any increase, but it didn't have a decrease. So we'll need to bake that in as well. But just with and there were a few other little small $10,000 adjustment. But anyway, there were some questions about the percent increase this budget over last year's budget. After making the adjustments that I just talked about, that increase is 3.3%. It was 4.1% in the first draft. And then as a percentage increase over the current year's forecast, next year's budget is now 4.4% over the forecast as opposed to 5.2 before those adjustments that I just mentioned. Any questions about that? I'm going to jump into the discussion about rate alternatives. So last year during this process, we looked at the next 5 years and projected some rate increases, and they were what we projected was 0 for fiscal 19. 3% for the next several years. You wouldn't have seen the one for 2023 because it only went out 5 years. But anyway, so that's changed. With that first pass that we gave you last couple weeks ago, that changed. But in those last 2 years, the 22 and 23, it's not the only driver, but the primary driver is that the spending in that first 3 years of the CIP. What you got there is our projections for CIP spending this time last year and what they are now. You can see for fiscal 18, the one we're currently in, and we've already been talking about this, we're going to spend more than what we had budgeted. And right now we're thinking that's about $5.2 million. The estimates or projections for CIP spending in 19 is roughly the same, but then you see in 20, it's up $7 million. Over the whole 5-year period that in that red box, that's the difference in the total. So it's about 2 million, 1 million, I guess, greater. And so you might ask, given the changes in those rate projections, there's decreases in the 20 and 23. So, why are rates going up at that point? But it has to do mainly with, first of all, the further out you go, the less impact it has on, the nearer term rate adjustments, and closer to now, the bigger impact. So that $12 million or so over the 18 through 20 is affecting what we're projecting in terms of the borrowing we may need, and all of that is what's essentially driving the change in those our rate increase projections. Yes.
Isn't quite a bit of the 5.2 that is coming due this year? Isn't a lot of that what we didn't spend last year?
I'm going to punt that to Vishnu if we're ready to talk about some of the details. This is where I was going to hand it off to him. So
I have one before Vishnu comes up. The blue is this year, and the black is last year.
Yeah.
But look at 2019, the black's much higher than what you show for being spent in 2018. That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, the numbers right above the bars, so that in 19 it's $600,000 less. We're now projecting to spend $600,000 less fiscal 19 than what we thought we would spend 19 a year ago. Following?
Oh, so it's
It is less.
So these are projections, both what you would spend last.
Let me try again. So, each year we project CIP spending over a 15-year period. We only usually talk about the first 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, what we projected for the next, we're going to talk about 5 years now, is shown in those black bars. So let's take fiscal 19. Last year we estimated we would spend, and you might have the numbers, but let's call it 22.5 million. This year we're projecting we'd spend 23.9 million.
Okay, so it's difference in projection from one year to the next year?
Yes,
Okay,
right.
sorry about that.
So what I'm trying to explain, if you look up at that, at the table above, we get out, all the numbers aren't the same. So why is that? Last year, we projected what's in that first row. Now we're projecting what's in that second row. So why is that? And what I'm talking about is the CIP, which is one of the primary drivers to why those number projected rate increases are different.
Go ahead, Heather.
So if I'm looking though at 22 and 23, right,
Right.
then the projections actually go down.
Right.
So is the 6% because of additional debt, or is it because of CIP that's more than 5 years out?
You may remember what's in 24. I don't think there's any big jump in fiscal 24. Now, I'm going to explain this. So one of the drivers of our financial management policies, or one of the things that we meet, is debt service coverage ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And that needs to be 2.0 according to our policy. And what that means is whatever our debt service is, if it's $10 million that we pay in our bond payments, then our net income needs to be twice that. So if your debt service goes up by $1 million, your net income has to go up by $2 million. So what you're seeing there is a combination of increased spending in CIP, which is increased somewhat the borrowing that is needed to support that CIP, which increases the debt service. So all those things are kind of working together, but they're being driven primarily off of an increased anticipated spending in the first 3 years there of CIP.
Which would make sense if I was seeing the rate increases actually correspond with the CIP spending, but it's offset. And
Yeah.
so if it's offset, are you saying that we're actually not going to meet that income ratio for a couple years?
No, good.
Or because otherwise the fact that we're doing additional CIP spending, it doesn't make sense to me that I would then be increasing rates after that.
So a couple of questions in there. All of these projections are designed to meet our financial policy objective, including the debt service coverage ratio. So no, this does not include, I mean, I think there's one year where like 1.9. Not an issue, and it's in fiscal 22, so a lot can happen between now and then. So it does, we don't lose any, we meet our financial obligations or performance measures throughout this whole thing. If we, I'm not sure how to address the question about timing of it.
Well, do you see what I'm getting at though? Because if it's, what I don't understand is if in the last 3 years, the projections are all that we're going to spend less on CIP. If I'm meeting my debt service ratio with the 3% increase, if my CIP spending is going down, where does the 6% come in 2022?
Well, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think it's going the same thing I'm going to ask in a little bit. I think it relates to, and I try to puzzle this out, there's the really large jump in debt service between 21 and 22, from 7 million to 9.4 million. And that seems to be the big driver of the 6%, at least as I could puzzle it out. So I couldn't figure out why our debt service jumped by 2.4 million in 1 year in 22.
Especially
So
when
that-
the projection of CIP goes down.
Because the debt service is included in these projections.
Yeah, it's factored in, and
Yeah, but it
that,
takes a big jump in 1 year, and I couldn't figure out why.
well, it's not so much, it is a jump, but it's because we've reduced debt for the last years. We've not added on debt until when we added the 6 million SRF loan a few years ago, and now we're adding some on. So our debt service has come down a lot. It's like, I think the budget for this year is just a hair over 7 million. This current year, I believe it was just under 7 million. A few years back, it was 10 million. So thank you for jogging my memory. So that's why, there's not, even though we got some increased spending in this year, that's not why it's not calling for a rate increase. We're not calling for a rate increase. Could do without one in 19. Staff is recommending something else. But, so yes, the debt service jumps up in that year, not because of anything unusual that we're spending. It's just because debt has gotten so down low. We will have spent our reserves back down to where they want them to be. And so as borrowing goes up and because of spending, debt service goes up, and to meet those financial parameters, our net income is.
So, for example, I'm just sorry, John, so we must be borrowing a lot of money in 20 and 21.
2021, yeah. Well, and I'd say a lot, 20 million or so is what's
Right.
contemplated in the.
That's all I'm trying to figure out. Debt service goes up in 22, so I'm assuming in the immediately
Right.
preceding time, there was a lot of borrowing, and I
Yes.
couldn't puzzle that out from the numbers.
You're just planning to issue new debt, new bonds at that point, just
Right.
as our general structure, financial structure.
Yes.
That's sort of the timing you see for issuing new bonds.
Right.
Okay.
And hopefully there'll be SRF funding available still then. It'll be cheaper than what we've got forecasted in here.
And a reason to issue debt is also because you want future customers to pay some of the costs, especially with most of our expenses in the CIP renewing and replacing. It's, borrowing, even though we might be able to cash finance more, I think there's a fairness issue as well as, again, having future customers pay their fair share of rehabbing the infrastructure that they take advantage of as well.
Yeah, no, that's a sort of a standard for our business way of dealing with financing.
Yeah, and I was just seeking understanding, not suggesting it was a good or a bad idea. I just couldn't piece together the numbers.
Now, did I understand you to say that the CIP is driving most of the increase in the budget?
The changes in where it is, yeah, yes.
All right. And when I look at this graph, if you look at 2019, we're not projecting any increase, and that year's expenditure is the highest except for the 2020. And we continue to have 3% increases. I don't understand that. It just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if that includes debt service figures.
Yeah, it's you can't look at an individual year's spending and that doesn't exactly correlate to when you might need a rate increase. We can't silly to say because it seems obvious, but if we got a big spending in 2 years, we can't wait 2 years to raise the money for that with a rate increase because it takes some, it needs to be implemented so you can collect the money to have it on hand. What I would suggest we focus on is that 3-year period, 18 through 20. That's $12 million more than what we thought we were going to be spending on that 3-year period a year ago. That combined with where we are with borrowing, what we're going to do with borrowing, and what that means to debt service, that's actually even, there's more factors in just that, but those are kind of the main things that are driving the changes that we're seeing. And it might be helpful. I mean, on that first line, we projected that we need 3% increases in 3 out of the next 4 years, and we're now projecting we need that 2 out of the next 4 years with a higher one on the fourth year.
One way this might look more logical if we had a different rate option, which is in the materials, but for example, we started 3% in 2019, 3% every year.
So we'll get to that.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that might make it seem more sense. I mean, the rate scenario up there now says, well, we need the money, but we're going to wait to get it, and so it's going to have this little hockey stick curve at the end.
Right.
Whereas if we implemented it right away, we wouldn't have to do the hockey stick,
Correct.
most likely. Yeah.
Yeah.
One last question on this slide. So I was wondering, going through the numbers, the debt service coverage ratio of 2. It's a two-part question. Part one is, how long has the OWASA had that? And does it make a difference how big the utility is? As I just look at when we go to the larger debt service, right? Well, now we go from 7 million to 9.5 million. Well, now we need to go from 15 to 18 million in operating income, cover that ratio. I just wonder if there's a scale factor that would make sense. As the utility gets larger and we're taking more debt, which I think makes sense per Ed's comments earlier, are we going to end up collecting enough? Is our debt service ratio going to make us collect so much money that we're going to start growing our reserve again?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we need to monitor and guard against. That's why, I wouldn't suggest making a big, a rate increase that would prevent us from doing, having to have a rate increase later on. But I don't think that the size would impact your desire to have a
Ratio of 2?
No.
And do you know has that been a long time thing?
It's been since 2008 or 9. I think that's when the financial management policy was in its current form. And just one other piece of information is our bond contract, bond holders, says that our debt coverage ratio should be 1.2. If we had a 1.2, we'd be far away from the bond ratings we have now. Not sure we might be investment grade, but might not.
Okay.
That's an interesting point because we were all celebrating the AAA, was it saying S&P? Yeah, it's like, that's good, but we may be one of the more conservative in our policies in the industry to get that kind of bond rating, and it may actually not be our best posture. It may be more conservative or more gold-plated than we need to be. Although it sounds great. I mean, everyone wants to be AAA, right?
Yeah, I know you've got a question.
Yeah.
I'm getting to you just a second. If I could respond to this real quick. What S&P decided when they upgraded us was the days cash on hand, which was above 400, and it was another liquidity. I don't remember now. That 400 plus days cash on hand is more than what our policy calls for. That's something we've been talking about for several years now. Now, in fiscal, by the end of 18, certainly in 19, we'll be at our targets for debt service, and it won't be 400 days. So, I mean, we may not have that AAA for all that long. So, I just was clarifying that our policy doesn't put us in a position to have a AAA, but our current condition does. That makes sense.
So going back to Jeff's point in terms of the fact that obviously when we borrow debt, that debt service, then if we have the 2.0 ratio makes it so that we have to generate more operating income. Would it then be worthwhile to actually take out debt in smaller chunks so that we don't have that essentially large step? So instead of doing $20 million, or I think that's where we arrived at, would it make a lot more sense to do a smaller amount and perhaps go out to the bond markets more frequently, but make it so that you have a longer time to actually work that debt down before you do another ask, and therefore increase where we have to deal with the potential 2.0 ratio?
Yeah, maybe. And in our planning, we look at that. We look at bundling them in the debt into 2 years, and that's what or 3 years or something else. We typically use 2 years just because of the disruptive nature of, bond issues and all that sort of stuff, and they're not free. What I would say to you is that I don't think we would come to you and say, oh, in this year we've got to issue a 10% rate increase because we've had a bond issue and blah, 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 and to meet that. In other words, just like I mentioned before, there was 1 year in here where it's not exactly 2.0, it's 1.9. I think we need to apply some art or I don't know, the right word is not, but, some
Common sense.
yeah, thank you. So, we were not, even though our policy said we needed to be at 2.0, we weren't there until, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. So we went a number of years without, even though our policy said that to get there. And if we fell below it, it wouldn't be the end of the world. And like I said, I wouldn't recommend to make a huge rate increase just to meet that if everything else was okay. And I'm sorry, one last point. When we do bond issues, we have some flexibility on how we schedule out debt service. That none of that kind of intelligence is baked in here. It's just the bonds come in here. Okay, so the debt service is amortized over straight line thing. So there would be a possibility when it came down to it that we could adjust. We might be able to adjust when the debt service happens to be able to avoid what you brought up.
So you brought that up, but I was going to ask you the same thing. I'm seeing the debt services decrease in 2021, where it starts to go up, it decreases, and then it jumps back up again. So in 2021, is there a reason why the debt services is drastically lower then?
Yeah, some of the bond issues that we have, there are 25-year maturities, and some of them are maturing, so we're not paying on those anymore.
Okay.
CIP?
You're going to cover the other options?
Yeah, I was going to, unless you're not interested,
No.
Vishnu kind of cover what the $12 million
Okay.
and those
All right.
differences.
Just checking. I know. I can't even remember why we needed to ask him.
Yeah, it's all CIP's fault, so I figure I'd get up and explain. But I'm really going to talk about the chart that's here and kind of explain the difference that we have between the 6 years there, FY18 through 2023. The black bars being what we projected at this time last year for those fiscal years. And then, of course, at this point now, we're in the blue bars, and the FY18, we're about 3/4 of the way through that blue bar. So I wanted to explain that. And just a point of clarification, the totals off to the right, the 116.9 and the 118.1, that's the 6-year total. So it's the 5-year plan plus the current year that we're in, because we're comparing to the different rate models that we did. So looking at the 118.1 million, that is the total of those 6 years of the blue bars. This is just kind of a quick breakdown of this in comparison to last year. So the majority of it, you see nearly 100 million, is essentially the same as last year. And when I say essentially, that I'm including in that minor changes in timing where we talk about the projects that get completed either ahead of schedule and are essentially pulling funds that we had planned for future years into the current year, or projects that we have slated. We've got some projects that may be slated for construction in FY22. When we look at them again this year, they're more urgent, so we slide those up. Those don't have a major impact in terms of the rate model, so I'm including that in that total of same as last year. The biggest example of this, if you look at FY 2018, that $5.2 million that we're expecting to spend more this year, about half of that is due to accelerated expenditures on the AMI project, which we had last year budgeted in FY 2019 in the black bar for FY 2019. So that's an example of some of the changes that you see that don't have a lot of impact on the rate modeling. Other changes that are important, the scope changes from a programmatic standpoint, that includes both planned increases of scope on projects where we find that there are other requirements needed to meet project objectives. It includes unforeseen issues that we run into during construction. It also includes new projects that come up during our annual review. In this case, we had over $11 million in new projects that are incorporated and prioritized and included in the 5-year CIP. And some of that is due to different studies we have ongoing. There's some that were related to action plans from the water emergency last year, plant risk assessments. So there were new projects that were not foreseen at this time last year that we added to the CIP. Cost changes, that every year we take a fresh look at projects, particularly the ones in the near term, make sure that we are projecting out not only the timing and the scope of the projects, but also costs. And in a lot of cases, we have better cost information. That really impacted us this year. And in particular on water main projects, we made some changes in how we estimate some of the near-term water main replacement projects. And we did a comprehensive assessment of some recent bids, both ours and neighboring utilities, trying to understand the reasons behind that and also things that we might do to make sure that we're getting value for our water main investment funds. But there were about $7 million that is attributable to that. And we're seeing that across the board. Different types of projects are costing more. The cost of construction is just increasing. And so we've reflected that in the projections that we're making this year. The last category, what we call the recapitalization funds, those are line items. You'll see them in the tables. They're referred to as long-term funding, but that's for years 4 and beyond. We're looking at the long-term projection. This is kind of our crystal ball of what we expect is the correct funding for years where we don't have specific projects identified. And we made a change in how we do that this year. And I can answer other questions about exactly what that is, but really we moved to more of a bottom-up kind of granular level look at what those needs might be. And that's a byproduct of the continuing development of our asset management program. The long and short of that is that long-term funding, and in this case it applies to years 22 and 23. It's actually less, as you noted, in comparison to what we thought last year. That trend actually does continue into the future years. So there isn't a major uptick. It's generally lower as we go into future years. So that was also a change to the projection and the recommended option that we have in the agenda packet. So as a whole, like I said, the total of the 6 years is $118 million. So for the 5-year plan, it's just under $98 million for the 5-year plan that we've put forth in Table 2. And that is the basis for the rate options that Stephen's talking about. Rate options 1, 2, and 3 are based on that $97.8 million in fiscal years 2019 through 2023. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have about this chart or about the tables that we have.
Sure.
So, I know we added staff to the department over the last year to help you execute projects, but just looking at some of the numbers, just as a reference point, what's the most CIP in dollars we've completed in a year thus far?
So yeah, that's a great question. So the most we've completed is I think it's 27 million.
Oh, okay. That's been
There's
before
a caveat. There's a caveat with that though, because usually the years where we have more CIP execution, we're dealing with major projects, like a single project. In that case, it was the wastewater plant expansion, and we knew we had something under contract, and that played into that total. But certainly, with the staff that we have on board, we are able to execute more of what we have in the CIP.
Yeah, because what Stephen's comments earlier made me think, and if for some reason, you were either chose to or were unable for some other reasons, if you took the capital from 20 and 21, and just averaged that. I did the even amount both years. I just wonder, for example, would that impact how much we would need to raise out of bonds versus what we paid for out of ongoing cash, and whether that might have an impact? Because I know option 4 talks about a more, I don't know, dramatic might not be the right word, but a bigger change in capital. But I just wondered if we took the middle part, took that big hump out of it and smoothed it, if that would have an impact. Okay.
Yinka?
So I have a question with the CIP. The things where it is going sort of less. So after 2023, is there going to be a decrease in the CIPs going forward? Or is it going to still be kind of evened out over time?
It's actually still increasing. I just meant a decrease in comparison to the black bars for the projections from last year.
Well, okay.
But as you go forward on the blue bars do increase as we project out.
Not in the last 3 years. The last three years, the blue bars get shorter than 2020.
Right.
Oh, I apologize. Okay, sorry. One of the things that we told the public when we were talking about AMI is that it wasn't going to have an impact on the budget. But the AMI is included in these costs as part of the substantiation for the increases. So what's the answer?
So one thing is the impact that AMI is having on these numbers is that some of the money from 19 moved to $8 for dollar. So that's not impacting the rate projection. The reason we were able to say, and it's, not they, but the reason it is the case that AMI is not anticipated to cause a rate increase, because compared to our meter replacement program that we were on track to do, it's less expensive.
Bob, I just comment there too, just from, it's a rare water or wastewater treatment capital project that generates savings or revenue. For the most part, it's always just cost, new pipe in the ground, things like that. This one also let us do things like save on gasoline.
But we do have operating savings that are tied to AMI. And one of the things I'll be advocating for maybe in the Finance Committee meeting is that we, have a clear budget for those, and we're actually tracking those savings as well. Even though they're sort of buried in all sorts of lines across our operating expense budget.
Yeah, and those savings that were in the, I guess the feasibility study are baked into the.
A question. Okay. So, in looking at the budgets, I do have my question would be as far as rate increases, but has there ever been, if you're spending less or you're projected to spend less over time, has there ever been a rate decrease?
Dave Moreau used to talk
There
about
has
it,
been a
rate
rate decrease in OWASA's history, but not in the last 30 years would be my off-the-cuff guess.
Right.
But we'd be happy to.
No, I know
provide
not
that.
since '87 for sure. I've got a chart that goes a little further than that.
Yeah, I don't think it was in the very early years. There were some large initial increases, and then there was, I think, a decrease. Where's Randy Horton?
Looking for someone older in the audience? Okay.
Okay, so move to options. This was in your packet, but so that first line is last year, same thing you saw just a minute ago, that the option 1 that's listed there is also the scenario that we were just talking about. This is what we talked about on March 22nd. Options 2, 3, and 4 are new ones that we have worked up since we last talked. And essentially, we're trying all of these solve for the same thing, the financial management objectives, funding the CIP, in the future O&M, but these are just different ways that we could use rate adjustments to fund the organization's activity. Staff would recommend a small increase, for example, like in options 2 and 3 this year. We only make decisions 1 year at a time, of course. It's revisited every year. And, you know, when we look at this next year and redo everything, then those future years may look different than they do now. But the only one thing that I'd point out is that if you look all the way over to the right, the cumulative impact of each of those 4 options, if they played out that way over the 5 years, don't consider, if you obviously eliminate last year's just because they're not any good anymore, and if you eliminate the option 4, I'm not saying you would, but just saying you did, then the one that results in the cumulative less impact on customers would be the one, the option 3.
So when I was looking at through the packet, I did prefer options 2 and 3. For me, I kind of like option 3 better just because it's a steady small amount. But I was still trying to figure out why the percent rate increases were kind of staggered the way they were. When I'm looking at option 2, it still has an uptick, but then it's just a difference. So I'm just trying to figure out if the rate is increasing on a smaller percentage, are we spending less each time?
No, it's just the cumulative effect of a rate increase. You know, a 1% rate increase today will give you so much revenue over time, and it's just, you know, the sooner you start with it, the less the higher you raise it this year, the less you have to do in future years. That's really all that's going on there.
Oh, John, I'm sorry.
Just looking at these options, you know, and option 4 actually involves cutting some capital projects out.
Right.
And just looking through the list of those, some of those look like they would be, from my judgment, would be okay to cut out. Others might be more problematic. Of course, you go for that as the staff does. Is it really realistic? Is it desirable for the board to pick through that list of cuts and some we don't?
I think if the rate option 4 is of interest, I think, yeah, we could be prepared and maybe at the finance committee to discuss in greater detail why we selected those projects, what's the impact of each one of those. I mean, we don't think any of those are super mission critical, but we think for various reasons they add value to our operation, and we would suggest they not be reduced. But if you have a certain rate target in mind, and you know, Stephen already mentioned, you know, we revisit this each year, and that is just so very important. As written in the material, this assumes we spend 100% of the capital projections every year, and it's 100% of O&M and 100% of the capital equipment. And of course, we've had years where we don't spend it all, and we don't want to overshoot on rates, over collect. So, you know, this annual true up that we do and check and extending is just a critically important part of the process. So, yeah, staff prefers option either 2 or 3. I actually think I might favor option 2 a little bit more because of the uncertainty in the future, and you can revisit it the following year, but it does set you up to avoid much larger potential increases in the future that could be a little more difficult for the public to budget and understand and support. And again, we think either option 2 or 3, but I'm getting off to your question. If there's interest in lower overall rate increases, yes, I think we would want to spend a good bit of time talking about the projects we identified for either reducing or eliminating and having a discussion. You know, does the board agree, not agree, or do you all see it differently?
Yeah.
Just, you know, options 2 and 3 start the rate increase in 2019 so that we don't have later. and a couple of people have commented. So, there could be a choice, but you didn't start the rate increase in option 4 in 2019. So what would appeal to me to investigate would be an option 4 that would be a selected number of those cuts, not all of them, but then starting a rate increase in 2019 that would have that leveling out effect. Just looking at the list of cuts, I see one thing on there, just due to my limited knowledge, I would say this is nice to have, but kind of a frill. And another one seemed to have some real environmental benefits. So,
Yeah, there's almost endless iterations of this. So yes, we could cut some projects and have a modest increase in 19.
Barbara?
Yeah, thanks. So you say each rate adjustment option is designed to meet our financial management objectives. Could you just summarize
Right.
financial
What
management
the
objectives?
objectives
Uh-huh.
are? Maybe, actually,
What?
yeah, they're in the financial report each quarter. The debt service coverage ratio is 2.0. It speaks to reserves, what our minimum should be for the 3 different reserves
So
that
stuff
we
you've
have.
already talked about.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Okay.
It talks about what bond rating we want to have, the percent of our debt to total assets. There's 10 of them.
So option 4, 2019, so you have reduced CIP budget. So I guess that wouldn't be too impactful, if at all.
If we cut out those
Yeah.
projects, that's kind of what we were talking here. Like the solar, what's that, 1.6 million, I think it is. There's a project to put a solar, what do you call it, farm, out of one of our properties. So that's one of the ones that's in that that's out of that reduced budget. And I don't recall what some of the other ones are, but that's what we were talking about, that if you wanted to dive in and look at each of those, that would probably be a committee thing.
Jeff, you had a question?
Yeah, so Stephen, are you going to show any of the detailed data behind that? It's behind that chart, these little tables. I have questions on page 4.5 then.
Okay.
And so if you just look at the table on 4.5 that just describes option 1, I wanted to get a little bit of detail on some of the numbers. So looking at the operating expenses over this time frame, are we anticipating any increase in staff? Is that built into that?
No.
For the same sort of 135 positions?
Actually, we're more or less predicting less because of the AMI.
Okay. Because, I'm looking at, if you look at the operating expense, I guess across this table, our operating expenses go up over the 5 years. It's 13.7%. But we're bringing in 20.6% more revenue. I keep trying to square that, it's hard for me. And I think it might be, again, my concern about or at least my question about whether the debt services ratio is cost
1% or 2% more than what we're seeing? What would cause a difference?
It would have to be, for example, take, what would mean that 2020 would be different than what we're showing there? It'd have to be a pretty significant difference in spending in that particular, for that particular year. Well, I think that's probably where I should stop. If we had expected to spend 15 million in CIP and we had to spend 25, that would do it. We expected to spend 15 and we spent 17, and that wouldn't do it.
Other than John. Barbara, I'm sorry, Barbara.
So I personally am not in favor of option 4. I think things are on the CIP for a reason, and so that would not be something that I would be in favor of. And I would really want us to understand how it would impact the things both on our strategic plan, and it seems to me that some of these things, if they aren't done and they end up being more critical than we expect, could have a real impact on the community. And so I think that we would need a very detailed understanding of how it would impact things like our energy management plan for that particular item on the solar, but more in terms of what the risk is to the community from delaying these items, because obviously staff thought they were important enough to put them on there in the first place for this year. But as I said, I am more probably in favor of option 2 at this point in time. I'm acknowledging that things change rather than option 4.
Barbara?
So Heather mentioned community, so I'm going to mention community too. So we talked a lot about AMI and that it would not have any impact on the rates. And we're rolling it out. And the rate increase is like, potential rate increase is right there. So I guess I'm just concerned about how the public, might view that, it's just, well, they said,
right.
And then here we are, should we decide to approve that? So that was just a thought I had.
I mean, I think it's a good point. I don't have a solution to it, but yeah, but no, I think you're right. That's almost certainly going to happen. Even if we didn't do any rate increase this year and did it, in the following year, I think that project is fresh enough to where people would try to tie that together.
Good.
Jeff raised a point about whether maybe water use will increase faster than you're assuming here. Say, what if water use in 1 year increased 10%? So that would increase revenues, maybe not 10%, because it would depend on how that interacted with the brackets in the rate structure. But how much would our costs go up if our water use went up 10%?
Less than 20%.
Hmm?
Less than 20%. I mean, I'm sorry, 80% of our costs are fixed. So 20% of the variable would fluctuate, but they would only fluctuate presumably 10%. So not much.
So we could sell more water.
John?
Well, I think one thing to comment on CIP, I mean, I think CIP, I'm a fan of infrastructure. Our president talks about infrastructure. I'm a fan of infrastructure. It's sort of like a different sort of savings account for our community, assuming that each and every project makes sense. And I think when we get to those projects, I mean, we should be doing our due diligence to make sure that each project makes sense. And if they don't, then, we create some other kind of savings like money in our reserves. Overall, if I accept our CIP as the real deal, then I'm a fan of option 2 and 3 because I think we're spending the money. And I think the other options are sort of delayed reactions. Kind of trying to fool ourselves and maybe trying to fool the community. I mean, let's just be real about it and, take the hard blows around the communication and just, yeah, absolutely. I don't disagree with you, but I think, we've got to, that's our responsibility to be able to communicate it in a way that makes sense to our customers, as difficult as it feels. Yeah, exactly.
That's
Early June.
Now, the other side is operating expenses, and I'm a little torn as to, I know we have.
Because for the reasons that, like Barbara mentioned, that the Aqua Vista project is supposed to be cost neutral, and that we've been talking about that and selling that for a while now. And then the projects, the capital improvement projects that are on the list to be deferred. I mean, tonight or this month, next month, we don't have to decide anything but for the next fiscal year, really.
Right.
We're looking at how this might work out for the next 5 years, but who knows what's going to happen in 2022 and 2023. You've got an escalation rate for operating expenses of 1.75 to 2%, and whether that's going to hold, who knows, with the way everything's going up and down these days. That I understand that the capital improvements projects that are on the list that could be deferred, we don't have to decide in 3 years. We've got things to do for the next couple of years, right? And we're not going to incur any expenses on those projects.
That's true. There's very few that, I think there's only one that really affects. That are included as part of that reduction. There are some risks. Right,
There's
There
a
is.
warehouse at the wastewater treatment plant.
Right, right,
And there's inspections on wastewater lines,
right.
which is a preventive maintenance
It is.
project, and you don't know what you're gonna find when if you don't do it at all.
Right.
Then the risk is greater.
So there are some risks.
So reducing some, but I think that was in year 2 and year 4, or something like that, those expenditures. So,
Yes.
so again, not in the next fiscal year.
Right.
So we really don't have to decide what's gonna happen in 2022 and 23 right now, because we really don't know. But I mean, that option 4 just looked attractive, but now we have incurred significant increase in costs in the CIP plan this year, and we will again next year. So, I'm leaning toward 2 and 3. Understanding that we're gonna come back a year from now and revisit this whole thing, and it might look entirely different.
Yes? John?
Yeah, one thought on the Aqua Vista communication, how it jives with the rate increases. I don't think it gets any easier a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, so unless we can anticipate multiple years of no rate increases as a realistic scenario, I don't know that it gets any easier. But the one thing I didn't mention is Vishnu and others will remember that we used to have a habit at OWASA of undershooting our CIP budget on a regular basis. And so some of my comments earlier I prefaced with the assumption that that's the real deal CIP. And so, you do some things differently if you anticipated that you're going to be undershooting your CIP for the next 5 years. So how confident do you feel that this is a pretty real projection of CIP?
Yeah,
That's an unfair question, but it's still an important question.
It's not the first time he's heard it.
It's not. I mean, we are building this and developing it so that that's our target. And if you look at, the biggest thing is anything that goes into the first fiscal year, we want to have as clear definition on that project as possible. That's what's in the past is caused some problems. You go into a project in that first fiscal year not knowing some of the risks and slowing up and fall behind in execution. So the projects that are in FY19, and that's what you see that in table 1, I highlight the ones that are active and ongoing as of April. The thought is that we want more certainty in that first year, and that helps us with execution, along with obviously having a full staff.
Thank you. And last 2-year results give you some credibility when you say that. So.
Any other questions around? Okay, Steve?
Yeah, I'll just wrap up by, for what it's worth, by the way, I prefer the second option as well for some of the things we talked about. Our history has been that we don't hit 100% of the CIP. Now, we've had a couple of years good track record, but, and to your point, Ray, we've got time. We don't have to make those decisions far out in the future. So that's why I would choose 2 versus 3, but for what that's worth. Where we are, so we're here on April 12th. We've got a Finance Committee meeting scheduled for next Tuesday or Wednesday, I think that is. Then we've got the board meeting on the 26th. On the 26th, we would like to ask you to authorize us to publicize a rate increase, an anticipated rate increase, and some budget information. The budget information is dependent on what we do about a rate adjustment. So I just want to say, so over the next 2 weeks, we would like, our plan is to, on the 26th, is to bring you a draft of a rate schedule that shows the impact of whatever we decide between now and then, what that impact's going to be on customers. So that's what we would ask you to authorize to publish. On May 10th, we'll talk about merit and cost of labor. But then on May 24th is the public hearing, and that's why on the 26th we want authorization to tell people what they're going to, what to expect on the 24th, so that they decide whether they want to come out or not. And on the 14th is when we're scheduled to approve the final budget, June 14th. Yes.
Just
issue. It looks like the only chance we have to further discuss what the budget should be is the Finance Committee meeting. Because on April 26th, you want us to say, you're going to put something in front of us and you want us to say, go with this for a
Let me
public
clarify
notice.
that a little bit. So what council has learned me over the years is that if we went to the public and said that we're anticipating a 2.75% rate increase, and here's what the impact would be. And that's what we publicized after our meeting on the 26th. And between the 26th and the 24th, or on the 24th, or I'm sorry, anytime between the 26th and the time it's approved, if we come up with something less than that, we're fine. If we were to come back and say, oh, no, we need 5%, then that would cause a whole process problem.
So you're saying it could go down but not up?
Right.
After you've announced the
After the
public
20,
hearing?
yeah.
Hmm.
Did I get that right, Paul?
That of the highest rate that might be adopted. There's no prejudice to any member of the public if you adopt a lower rate. Better off. Higher notice covers lower rate.
Does that apply also to the budget or just to rates?
We studied the rates because the purchase and agreements of purchase sale require certain notices to the university if rates are going to change by a certain amount. I don't think that we have typically thought that changes in the budget itself were things that required a different notice or addition. Thinking about it right now, it strikes me that that's not the case.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I would love to have, since it sounds like we may be having a rate increase, and I understand why it's not tied, but it's going to be difficult for a lot of the public to understand how it's not and how Agua Vista is still cost neutral. If we could perhaps get some sort of a draft talking points for the finance committee, if everybody else on the finance committee thinks it would be a good idea, that would be written in non-finance speak about why we actually may have a rate increase this year. And again, why it's not tied to Agua Vista.
Then you want to talk about that at the committee meeting?
I think it would be good.
Okay.
I think there's a consensus on it. Okay. Nice.
So last thing I would have is are we going to get together at the finance committee meeting and just go into deeper questions about the material that because we've had three meetings now, so there's a bunch of stuff that's been put together. Is there anything new that you want to see besides what you just mentioned?
The operating expenses deep dive.
I thought you had a special request that you had, John. Additional information.
To me, there's a difference between this year's budget and, let's say, the 5-year budget. I'm interested in the 5-year budget. This year's more interested, I am personally more interested in the 5-year budget than this year's budget. I mean, I'll have questions about this year's budget too. So my ideas were more about the 5-year look than this year's look.
But staff doesn't need to generate any new information.
I don't think so.
What would you like?
So I would like to see how the 5-year budget would go into the 6th year, just so we can get a better understanding of this current year plus the next ones, because I want to see if we're increasing rates for 2019 and we're increasing it each subsequent year, are we going to have a rate increase in 2024 as well? That's what I'd like to.
Okay.
Sure.
I just want to clarify, I'm not contradicting Heather. I would like to see the 5-year operating pro forma, I guess, just so we can begin to look at that. I'm not sure, I might have made that unclear. I'd like to see that, but that's what you requested, right? Yeah.
Jeff?
Yeah, just, and since I can't attend that meeting, I think part of the reason that I'm interested, again, I just look at the delta here. You look in 2023, our operating expenses are 2.8 million more than they are next year. But then as we roll through all this, in order to meet our requirements, even though our CIP is down at below where it's been, 16, 18, 13, we're saying we need to collect 7.7 million more dollars. I've tried really hard, Stephen. I still can't quite get it. CIP's lower. We only need 2.8 more million in operating expense. We've got to collect 7.7 more million dollars per year. I can't get there. I'm sure you'll help me understand as we proceed.
I think part of it is our capital spending, our CIP relative to the size of the organization is relatively high right now in this period of time. And that, to me, that might be what's driving this ratio issue.
Well, as we were walking out of the last meeting, I mentioned to Heather, it's changed a little bit from the first draft, but we're close to spending $20 million a year on CIP, and that from 23 beyond we are. And years that Vision mentioned.
Do we have any public comment on this item?
Thank you.
You understand everything? Ed?
So just to be clear on expectations, so normally the committee agenda would go out tomorrow for next Wednesday's meeting. And we can do that, but it's going to be links to all the information you already have. It'll probably be early next week before we provide you some of the additional information that you requested tonight, just to make sure everybody's okay with that. Okay, thank you.
Move on to item number 5, review action plan for improvements identified by organizational assessment. Stephanie Glasgow, Director of Human Resources and Safety, will provide some information.
Thank you so very much. Okay, so as you know, we have been working with Visions on our diversity and inclusion plan that the board approved back in March of 2017. And the plan provides a task directing us to develop and administer and evaluate an organizational assessment and to come up with recommendations for improvement. So we had great participation in the focus groups from the board, from employees, and we have 40 general recommendations that are organized into 7 categories. There's an additional 13 recommendations from Visions organized in 4 categories. And then for recruitment and retention, employees and the board gave us 26 recommendations. So this, what you have in your packet tonight, is a draft action plan for those improvements and how we're going to handle those. It's basically 2 steps. The first step is to assign the diversity resource group, the diversity recruitment group, and the diversity leadership group, and to include all employees to prioritize and delegate those recommendations moving forward. The second step has 3 parts that include the Human Resources Department, Vision, and the Diversity Recruitment Group, and the Diversity Leadership Group to review all of our recruitment and hiring processes. And that includes things like the mentoring program, career development, our promotional opportunities, and such. So I'd like to mention that it's important for you to know that the easy things we've already been doing. We haven't been waiting for them to be prioritized. We're moving forward, and a lot of staff are being involved in that. But what we're here tonight this is in front of you. We'd like to get feedback from you. Do you like this approach moving forward? And I wrote this in the agenda item, while diversity and inclusion work is ongoing forever, we expect to have these tasks done by September of 2018. I just want to get feedback from you. Are we on the right track?
Any feedback from the board? John?
I applaud how the team, the approach of working within teams to kind of refine these next steps and carry them forward. As I wrote in my note about our quarterly report to the community councils and so forth, that it doesn't strike me that it's quite an action plan, and that's really more just how we label it, because it seems like it's a process to define an action plan, and that's fine. But when I think of an action plan, I'm looking for, well, for example, maybe the SMART model, specific, measurable, people who are responsible. It's not a problem, but I don't see it at that stage quite yet. So I just say I'm glad to see the way it's progressing in the process. I think we want to sort of maybe externally reduce the visibility to it, or how we describe it.
I understand.
Any other comment? Yes?
So I see that the plan's goals relate to diversifying OWASA's workforce, as well as lending to an inclusive work environment. And I think that this is fine, what you presented, just keeping those two goals in mind. So I think it's fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yinka?
So for me, I kind of like the exhibits where it's broken down specific. So we're getting details of where we're at and what our end objective is. And I do like seeing how it gets to more details instead of just a broad overview. So thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see any other suggestions to you, so that's the feedback back at this point.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on this item? None. Okay, thank you. Okay, the next one is the appointment of the nominating committee. As the board, at least except for John and Ray, last year, the new guys, last year we changed how we did the nominating of officers. Typically, the chair appoints a nominating committee, then they come back to the full board with a recommendation. The board as a whole could add additional candidates for positions. Last year, the board did that as a whole in a meeting, and we started with the chair, went to the vice chair, and then we went to the secretary. And we checked out with people. Okay, everybody's indicated whether they were interested in holding off the nominating process. So we need to talk about that, and we're comfortable with that. We'll continue doing that. The second thing that we decided to do is that each of the officers would fulfill that responsibility for 1 year, and they could go to another job of the officer, but you only stay 1 year in the position. And the idea here is to increase diversity, improve the inclusion of everybody on the board, and to develop, leadership in the board. So I asked the board if there's any other further comments, or if I left anything out, and then how do we proceed for this year? Maintain the course, or do something different? Yinka?
I have a question for you, Bob. I know we said that we were going to do it as a practice. So mine would be as far as the nominating committee itself. I wasn't here for the first ones. I was just here for the last one where we did it as a whole board as the nominating committee. So what would be the process of having that be the existing procedures going forward, where the whole board feels included in the process of the whole board as a nominating committee?
If the board wished to continue to use the practice that's used over the course of the last year, then all it has to do is decide that it wants to do that. It may also decide to do that and leave the bylaws in place. So you're doing it as a second annual exception to the bylaws, or you may decide that you want to ask us to change the bylaws so as to reflect that new process as the permanent process. Entirely up to the board as to how to move forward this year with the nominations and elections. And we're prepared to either continue the practice that you did before, go back to the practice set out in the bylaws, or do it any other way that you want to do it. It would be up to you to decide how to do that.
Can I just add that I think you will agree with this, Bob, that the practice we did last year is not inconsistent with the current bylaws.
Not inconsistent.
It's just a committee of the whole.
And I wanted to say, from my experience to Ray and John, when we decided to do it as a committee of a whole board, it seemed to bring some board members who felt the process was unfair prior years, more like a peace of mind, of ease of everybody is included in the process and there's no exclusion from the process itself. So that's why I like the process of a committee of a whole board.
Sure.
I also support it, at least as a practice for this year, and if we want to change the bylaws, I'm okay discussing that too.
Yeah, I thought the process is much more transparent. It's a little messy doing it in public, but it wasn't terribly uncomfortable for any of us. But it's certainly transparent to the public and certainly more transparent to the board. Ray and John, you have any questions about the process? What?
Well, just, I appreciate you explaining the motivation, and so I'm not going to question the way you decided to do this. I think it might be better to not change the bylaws immediately. You know, the new process is something we can do every year if we want to, and if it has any unintended consequences or whatever, then we might think of some entirely new way to do it. But anyway, I appreciate your explanation. I'm on board to keep doing this.
Bob?
Let me make one other remark, and it's already been mentioned, but there are really three things in play here. One is whether or not you continue to do what you did last year. Second is really the one-year term limit for officers. The one-year term limit isn't really a one-year term limit unless you do it for another year. In other words, if you stop present practice before you make these nominations, presumably who are serving would be eligible to serve again because the new rule only applied for 1 year. So it strikes me that in order to make sure that you get the benefit of the turnover and therefore the increased opportunity for service, all the board members, you'd need to do the present practice for at least 2 years, have a full run of experience with it. That said, I think if you will decide that, hopefully you can decide that.
Can you run that by me one more time?
Well, yeah. And you know, I don't know if I can look you in the eye while I say it or not, because it applies to the officers who are here now. In all of the previous years of OWASA's existence, leadership officers of the board have been eligible to succeed themselves. We've had a number of officers that succeeded themselves for 2 and even more terms. I think 3 might have been back. that ability to succeed oneself in office certainly has benefits in terms of experience and the development of a habit of leadership and a method of leading the board. It also has the detriment of excluding by an equivalent number, the number of people who might serve in that office over time. Given the length of your terms, if officers are going to serve 1 or 2 or even 3 terms, then that means that almost nobody else is going to be able to serve for the next period. And so your 3-year terms run out and then an opportunity. So, present rule that you adopted for the year that would end June 30th suggests that officers may not succeed. We're about to figure out how to elect officers for July 1st. You don't continue the rule that you decided to follow present fiscal. You don't continue that for another year, then it will not prohibit people who are presently serving from being reelected.
Oh.
It will not have had that effect. In every other way, the rule would have been effective, but it won't have a effect of opening up the office. I didn't even think about that last year this time, but as we get ready to figure out how to nominate and who will be eligible, of course that becomes
I just thought about it in kind of a common sense way. I mean, we're about to make nominations as a committee of the whole board, and we've decided that officers will not succeed themselves, so let's just do that.
And I have, that's completely up to the board.
Because we're
I don't want anything that I've said to say you ought to do it one way or the other.
Because we're still in this year
Yeah.
where the rule applies.
John, and then Heather, and then Yinka.
Well, I like the idea of, lots of rotation of leadership roles. And I personally am not keen without more practice to put it in the bylaws, because I'm afraid of that one year where we run into problem. I mean, we've got Barbara leaving this year. We've got Heather leaving this year. Bob can't be chair. I don't want to be chair. So, maybe this year it works, but, to me, there's going to be a year where it won't work. So I prefer the idea, especially when we have a nominating committee with all the board members, where it's just one of our considerations as we choose officers, an important one, just like diversity is an important one, just like, good listening skills might be one of those criteria that we would assume. And so I'm less keen about making that sort of a rigid requirement, and I hope I'm not offending anyone with that, because I do want to support the idea of it each time I feel like I can.
The one thing that I thought about, I'm sorry, I'm out of order. Heather, go ahead.
Sorry, no problem. I was actually just going to say the same thing, that I definitely support it as a practice for this year, but I'd like the board to get a little bit more experience with it before.
Here, let me talk then.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
It may sound strange, but we have had years in the past where there was literally only one willing person to serve as board chair. So it has happened.
So with your comment about the one willing, I know last year when we did it, we said every single board member is eligible for every single role, except if you've already served in that role. I think the way we also did it was, if you wanted to exclude your name completely from any role, you were able to do that. So to say you didn't want to serve at all. And then I think our numbers were kind of dwindling at that point, with at least 3 people who, before we voted or before we even had the ballots, that they were already excluded themselves from So I think that's something else we need to consider, people who exclude themselves plus uneligible people.
I think the term that John used, can't succeed yourself, a little bit different than when you set 1-year term. It leaves it vague whether can you be off a year and then come back in office, or because I think we just stated it was a 1-year term. We didn't. Yeah. Well, I think if you say you can't succeed yourself, it covers it. If you say 1 year, then you have to kind of get more complicated and add other description about whether somebody can wait a year and come back. Did we actually say it the way you said it, though, is that once you served in the position, you could come back? You couldn't come back. Okay, so that's different than.
But all that's subject to change. If
Yeah.
you want to change it in the future. I mean, we're not going to be locked in with anything. It's just for the next year, I say. And by golly, it's worked real well for me this year.
Let it go. Let it go.
Okay. All right, so we have 2 questions. We want to meet as a committee as a whole to make the nominations. And I think I hear consensus about that. I haven't heard enough dialogue about you serve 1 year and you can't serve enough. Yeah. So, well, if everybody's, and did you
Yeah,
have
we have to
how we
look at the notes
worded
because
it?
I had it a little, I thought it was a
If
little
you look
different.
at your agenda item materials, the way it's described in the discussion section, the 1, 2, 3, third paragraph, that the board determined to set 1-year term limits for each office. Doesn't say may not succeed. It does not say may not serve again in the office in the future. Excessive 1-year term. But again, however you want to decide to interpret that, however you want to apply it going forward, fine.
And Bob, can you explain again the 1-year term limit and succeeding itself? So you could serve 1 term? What's the difference?
I'm only reading you what the written materials say, and I'm adding to that narrative that you may decide to interpret that however you wish to interpret it. Further state of confusion, but if the board decided that it wanted to nominate and elect somebody to successive 1-year term, since this is not a bylaw, this is practice, you certainly would be able to do that.
I don't think we got.
I hope that doesn't throw it into further confusion. I'm not trying to. Such board to decide what that 1-year term limit means.
I think it needs some clarification, at least reach a consensus.
Well, you need it with respect to the present officer, sir, but I don't hear. You need the present officer, yes.
Well, and John's already said he doesn't want to be chair again. And Barbara and I, who are the other ones who have served, are both leaving. So it would only be if Jeff wants to
Jeff would be vice.
Want to be vice chair again.
No, you can't be vice chair.
Well,
that's the thing. That's what we're saying. We've never, if we're saying just successive, he wasn't vice chair this year. I was. So then he could actually be vice chair next year.
Yeah. point.
right? But I agree. I think that if you say never again on a 6-year term, you may end up with a math problem.
I don't know that I'm particularly interested in being vice chair again, but I assumed I was eligible. That's how I understood the rule. Like I could be vice chair again now. Bob can't be chair next year. Yinka couldn't be secretary next year. That. Yeah, if somebody's, vice chair their second year or something. I don't know. Anyway, go ahead, John.
I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't wrestle it down to these details last year, just because, in a sense, I would say we're almost overcomplicating it. I think we, to a degree, one degree or another, embrace the concept of it. And so if we want to formalize it, that's the next step. Or we could just sort of say collectively, we, to one degree or another, embrace it, and we'll act accordingly.
I think that using the language, you can't succeed yourself is clearer than just a 1 year. The 1 year just kind of leaves it up.
The specific motion, Andy's handed me the minutes from that meeting, the specific motion, Yinka made a motion that as they practice for the next election of office.
It's the second paragraph.
I'm sorry, second paragraph. Robert Morgan made a motion to set 1 year term limits for each of the officers, chair, vice chair, secretary. And that motion passed. There is a 1 year term limit for each of the officers. I agree with John Fiscal. President office.
That was my understanding.
You're saying it does leave open the possibility for someone to come back 2 years later.
Yes, I don't think that's clearly prohibited by this language.
So okay. Is there consensus to just stay with it the way it is? Is that what okay. We got consensus on the, on doing it a committee of the whole, and consensus that they're 1 year terms. Is that, you're looking at it still, so you have any question? Okay. Do we have consensus on that? All right. That was easy. Okay.
It was easy and we made it difficult.
What? Okay, let me see where we are on the, all right, number 7, review board work schedule.
So when do we take action on next year's officers?
14th? First meeting in June.
It's another public, we don't, as a nominating committee, we don't meet in between meetings to.
Nope, it's done do it that night.
All right.
And I forgot to take was there any public comment on the last item? No, okay. John?
There was another practice that I don't know how the rest of the board felt about it, but I was trying to implement, which is the chair is not the chair of the board chair is not the chair of the nominating committee. As practice I implemented my 3 years and I hope would continue. And so I'd encourage you, Mr. Chair, to consider that as a good practice as well. Good governance practice.
Okay. So basically, you appoint someone to lead the discussion. All right. All right, let's go to item number 7, review board work schedule. Any public comment on the schedule before we get started? Okay. Ed, can you begin the discussion?
Yes. From agenda pages 7 through 73. Draft. The items discussion. Budget based. Date. And a couple items note for the May 10th meeting, room. Draft or
Okay, any questions, comments about that?
no group now. And back now or
Any suggestions, comments on that topic? I don't see any yet.
Okay.
Are there any requests from board members, committees, or the staff about items for the calendar? We, at our session with Visions, we discussed having another meeting with them, and we got a rundown from them about what are the outstanding issues and suggesting that we have a third meeting to have that for June 30th. So we have Barbara's wisdom, plus I think Angela can still meet with us by then. So do you have any times you don't want to meet, or do you just want us to send out a doodle poll? I guess the first question is, do we want to spend the time before June 30th to have this training? We need to have it June 30th because Heather's going to be doing it too. Consensus that we'll do.
So Barbara, you're leaving June 30th. Heather, you're leaving June 30th. Okay.
All right. I'm not seeing anybody's opposed to having the meeting. So can you send out, there's a consensus? Do you have any range of dates? Personally, I'd like to do it in May sometime.
frequently asked questions, which is, hey, you said there wasn't going to be one because of Aqua Vista. So that's sort of a separate thing. But I think our main thing wants to be, why are we having a rate increase? Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no objections, we will adjourn. Thank you very much. Nobody ever fights me. Well, I hope you were comfortable tonight, because it sure felt hot to me. I was sitting here, my ears are burning, and I'm going, well, it must be warm enough for Yanko, so I won't say anything.